Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Dave Baldwin with the Military Department, and as you mentioned, I'm joined by Colonel Steve Buteau, who's our Vice Chief of Staff. In that capacity, he is responsible for oversight of the strategic development of our cyber programs as well as the day-to-day operations of them. As both Director Gilducci and Director Ramos testified, the California Military Department provides unique military capability to the interagency team that tackles the cyber problems and threats that occur in that domain on a daily basis. The Military Department is uniquely poised because we exist simultaneously as both a state agency and a member of the Department of Defense. So we're both a federal and a state agency simultaneously. That gives us unique access to entities like United States Cyber Command and the National Security Agency that we can share information and best practices in developing the threat picture of what's out there in the cyber domain. In addition, we have developed ties with academia and in the civilian high-tech and cyber arena to learn the cutting-edge technologies that they're using to see the threats that they're seeing and then bring that information back to the interagency to share it with our other partners. One of the things that's interesting about the National Guard is that a member can serve in the military, in the National Guard, but be concurrently in academia in their full-time job or working for a company like Google or Facebook or YouTube or Yahoo and bring those skill sets back to our organization and able to robust our efforts. We are predominantly focusing our cyber work in three main lines of operation. The first is in maintaining that awareness to make sure that we are on the cutting edge of understanding what threats are developing out there in the environment, what tools and techniques the adversaries are using, so that we can help develop counters and threats to prevent them from accessing our information or damaging our systems. The second is that through our computer network defense team, as they testified before, we provide capability to state agencies to do vulnerability assessments and practice intrusions to help them harden their networks. As we robust that effort in that team, we're going to be able to make that available not just to state agencies, but ultimately we'd like to be able to see that be available to go down to the local level and to law enforcement agencies throughout the state. And then finally, we also work with the Highway Patrol and the FBI that if there is an intrusion or attack on a .gov system, we provide capability to help them with the forensics and the analysis of what occurred as they built their cases to go through the judicial system. At our strategic level, our main focus is continuing to expand the capability that we have. We have the 8-person computer networks defense team. It's been very busy. They've done over 40, worked with over 40 agencies to date. We have also fielded a cyber operations squadron in the Air National Guard that's a part-time entity down in Van Nuys that assists us with threat modeling and practice intrusions. And then we just found out from the Department of Defense that California was selected through a competitive process to be the first of 3 out of the 54 states and territories that have a National Guard to get a 39-person computer protection team that will dramatically increase our capability. That'll be a federally funded team that we will field beginning in federal fiscal year 16 to be fully operational capable in federal fiscal year 17. So with that, we open it up to your questions.
Do you have?
Well, I think we'll take the questions, and I'll certainly chime in on the relevant things with the CNDT.
All right, thank you. I had a question on maybe you could explain Title 32 funding and why it's important in the context of domestic cybersecurity.
Sure. So the National Guard spends the bulk of its time in peacetime under state control. And we can bring people onto duty into one of 2 statuses when under state control, either on state active duty, which means it's funded by the state of California. The soldiers and airmen remain under the command and control of the governor, but the state pays for it. Title 32 is Title 32 of the United States Code that is a duty status that enables the federal government to use Department of Defense funds to bring our soldiers and airmen onto duty, but they remain under the command and control of the governor. The third status that we can be on is with the status that we use when we fight and win our nation's wars overseas is Title 10. That's where the federal government pays for it, but we are under the command and control of the president. Under Title 32, we have a great deal more flexibility under the law about what we can do to assist civil authorities, whether it's for law enforcement functions through counter-drug or in a civil disturbance, or in the cyber domain, where we have more leverage and ability to go out and assist state agencies that if we were in a Title 10 federal status, we would not be able to do. Title 10 focus really is external to threats external to the nation, and under Title 32 we're focused on federal support within the state.
Thank you. And can you explain the funding model for CNDT, how it's changed since its inception?
Sure. Well, under the former speaker, what happened is we were able to get $500,000 of initial funding to do an initial study of capability, a validation of the capability. And with those funds, we were able to perform the 40 assessments, plus or minus a few, that was discussed earlier. And of course, the findings of those assessments were not startling, but certainly told us what we would expect, which is that there are vulnerabilities out there. And this is a fairly good cross-section of various state agencies and departments, small and large. It's just that we have the ability to go in with very complex tools and the training to look for these vulnerabilities in the system. The good news, you haven't got a lot of good news today, so I'm going to give you some good news. The good news is that between our initial assessment and then follow-on assessment, we typically see 10-fold reduction in vulnerability. That tells you how effective some of these programs and measures that have been proposed today are, that we're raising the awareness, and we're doing this on by establishing a relationship based on trust. The $500,000 initial funding from Speaker Perez is now gone, and we've migrated to a pay-as-you-go system. So we're in a very awkward position because the military department is not a business. We can't function on an accounts receivable basis. And right now, if the fiscal year were to end today, we would actually wind up probably closing our books with having to use roughly $150,000 of our own funding to close out those unpaid receipts. So it's not a sustainable model that we're on right now. But I believe that some action, if there's any action that takes place in the next weeks or months, it should be the focus on making one of the first successful efforts in this team approach that Ms. Robinson discussed earlier sustainable.
And how much would it cost to provide the service that you provide if a private entity was to provide it?
Well, more good news is that now we're on the online catalog. So it's really going to depend on the agency that we go and see, and then also on the scope of work. The Department of Technology validates all the requests and makes sure that it's a validated requirement, and that we're going in and doing what needs to get done. But it can typically start for as little as $10,000 for an assessment, and that's a really good bargain. But as General Baldwin mentioned earlier, we're government subsidized. A lot of the training and the expertise we get because of our federal mission, or because these people are members of private industry and they already have a lot of these skills. I can tell you this, though, is building that capability outside the military department is very difficult, because there's a huge demand vector for people with cybersecurity talent these days. And so it's a great, when we were kids, if going into nursing or being an engineer was the way to go. Today it's going to cybersecurity, because there's so much job potential out there. Just to train somebody to do penetration testing is a long and arduous process, and not everybody who starts it completes it. So it's really important from the state perspective that we have those skills inherent in our state ability to go out and do assessments, so we can keep the business going.
So in answer to your basic question, if we were to contract out those assessments to a private entity, it would be a lot more than $10,000 per visit.
So the answer is a lot more.
A lot.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chu?
I wanted to drill down a little bit on those workforce observations, because I continue to hear, and I think we all do, that some of the biggest challenges we have in fixing our government IT is we have a lot of well-meaning, great rank-and-file IT employees who are stuck managing and maintaining old legacy systems. They don't have the time or the opportunity to figure out what are the latest cutting-edge 2015 IT practices and security protocols that are out there. You mentioned within your department that you have a program that allows some of your folks to go back and forth to the private sector, back to the public sector, and that is not something I've heard is happening statewide. Could you talk a little bit more about what you've done and whether that's a program that we could replicate in other areas of state government?
It's something that's unique to the National Guard because most of our part-time soldiers and airmen have other civilian jobs full-time. So you might be working for the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, for example, but simultaneously be a member of our cyber defense team in a part-time capacity. So those people that are working out in the high-tech world in their full-time job can serve concurrently in the National Guard and again bring those skill sets back to us. What we do though is as we develop that awareness of the emerging threats is share that with our interagency partners through the task forces and teams that both the CIO and Director of OES discussed earlier.
If I may, one thing I would add to that is that also because we're uniformed, the California Military and Veterans Code applies to us. In other words, we're all accountable to General Baldwin, so he has the ability to make sure that our people are out there, they're doing a good work, but if they mishandled sensitive information or if they try to do something that wasn't in accordance with our practices, he has the ability to take action on those people. And I think that's very important because we have to be successful not only in providing information and services to civilians, but also protecting privacy and intellectual property, and we can't take that lightly.
I very much appreciate those comments, and as we were discussing before with our CIO director, we don't have that same level of centralization within the other 150 agencies. And a question I would pose to the California Department of Technology, not to be answered now, is are there ways for us to consider options beyond the status quo of rank-and-file IT workers who are unable to work in the private sector, or outsourcing, which is a totally different model? Is there a different way of us being able to provide job training and workforce training to current public sector employees to give them the skills that they need to come back? Because to me, I think that is really holding us back in a lot of instances. And obviously there are politics around all these options, but that seems to be a path that we have not considered as a state.
I won't answer on behalf of the other department, but I'll tell you something exciting. Our team from the California departments that have been briefing today, we went to the National Governors Association Cyber Summit in San Jose last week. And there's a lot of innovation taking place across the 54 states and territories. What's particularly exciting about cybersecurity to me is that unlike at the federal level, we have more capability of shaping policy here in the state. And so I think we're more agile to respond to these things. So really the whole thing is that if the proposal is worth pursuing and there's a validated need, I think that those are things where that's room where California can take the lead. And we're certainly going to be building out our cyber capability through our youth and community programs. So as technology mentioned earlier, we want to start developing this cyber technology base in the middle schools and high schools and developing these people up so that they have this instilled culture of public service, and they don't have to serve in the military to satisfy that public service. They can go into our state governments.
Great. And just to close, I'd love to ask Director Ramos, potentially not today, but if you'd be able to provide us some information about whether you've thought of these sorts of workforce training programs as a way to really help buttress our own capabilities internally. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Actually, I do have a question, Madam Chair, to the General or Colonel. In the past, the military has gone out when they had a need for doctors specifically to recruit doctors and bring them in and make some exemptions. Has there been any thought about doing that for the cyber community, obviously with Silicon Valley here in California?
Something that at the Department of Defense they're struggling with is how to recruit and retain top-notch cyber experts, because normally what happens, particularly in the active duty, not so much in the Guard, is they'll recruit them in, give them this phenomenal training, and then at the first chance they jump into the private sector to make a lot more money than they make with us. We don't have quite the problem in the Guard as that, because again, as I mentioned before, you can serve concurrently with a full-time job. There are efforts and discussions in the Pentagon about how we can incentivize people to come into the military that have these skills already, so we give them additional bonuses and things like we do with medical professionals. And then we're also looking at maybe changing necessarily the standards so that at least within the Army we might have a cyber corps, that we never intend any of these soldiers that come in to go overseas or even go outside. So they may not have to, we may be able to waive some of the other restrictions or limitations in terms of disabilities that would otherwise prevent them from coming in and serving.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for joining us here this afternoon, General and Colonel. And next up, we have CHP CIO Scott Howland and Captain Rich Desmond. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Captain Rich Desmond, and I will also be tag teaming today with Chief Scott Howland. He is our Chief Information Officer and the Chief who oversees our Information and Management Division for the California Highway Patrol. The CHP shares your concern about cybersecurity, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here today to explain our role in ensuring the state's cybersecurity. From a law enforcement perspective, we also understand the impact of cyber attacks on public safety and the personal implications for people who have been victimized by these types of crimes. The CHP plays an integral role in cybersecurity in two very general areas. One, as the state's first responder, if you will. We are the primary investigating agency over cyber crimes occurring on or against state property. That's jurisdiction that's provided to us by the Government Code. The Government Code also requires state agencies to report cyber crimes and all crimes to the California Highway Patrol. We have a dedicated unit, a computer crimes investigations unit, which you heard referenced here today, and Chief Howland will be talking in much more detail about that in a few moments because he oversees that team. The other very large role that we play in cybersecurity efforts, and Director Ghilarducci referenced this, is our role as a participant in the state's fusion centers. What those fusion centers are is they're 6 centers. 5 of the centers are RTACs, Regional Threat Assessment Centers. The CHP has personnel in 4 of those 5 centers. And then there's a state-level threat assessment center. We call it the STAC. In the regional threat assessment centers, there's multiple agencies represented there. Their boundaries generally correspond to FBI field office boundaries, and they have connectivity with local FBI field offices. So they work very closely with state, local, federal stakeholders in this area. And they share information. It enables us to maximize resources by sharing information with other agencies and getting that information out to the field. On a similar way, the STAC does that at a state level, but the STAC is more designed to get information from the regional centers and push the information out to state agencies and state leaders. The mission of the STAC, which is commanded by a CHP captain and staffed by a CHP sergeant and multiple officers with special skills, and including cyber digital forensic skills. The mission of it is to serve as California's information sharing clearinghouse of strategic threat analysis and situational awareness, reporting to statewide leadership and the public safety community in support of efforts to prevent, prepare for, mitigate, and respond to all crimes and all hazards impacting California citizens and critical infrastructure. Now, the RTACs and the STAC, their primary mission is not cybersecurity, but of course this is an area that's growing and becoming a much larger and larger part of what they do. They collect and disseminate information on all crimes, terrorism-related and terrorism-related incidents, and like I mentioned, their investigators and analysts in these threat assessment centers have specialized training in cybersecurity issues. In our efforts at these fusion centers, it's complemented by our officers who are assigned at our division-level investigative services units. We have 8 field divisions within the CHP, and each of those divisions have an investigative unit. Investigators in those divisions, some of them have specialized training in cybercrime. Some of them are assigned to high-tech crimes task force. Assemblymember Cooper was actually supervised some CHP officers in his prior life with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. So our role in the fusion centers is complemented by our statewide presence, and it's also complemented by our collaboration with our state partners. In both our role as the first responder to crimes against the state and our role in the fusion centers, we collaborate very, very closely with our state stakeholders who you heard from today, OES, the Department of Justice, Caltech, and of course the National Guard. And with that, I will turn it over to Chief Howland to discuss our investigative efforts in more detail.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Chief Scott Howland with the CHP, and I have a dual role, and I kind of want to approach this from two standpoints. One is I oversee our Computer Crimes Investigations Unit, but I'm also our CIO. So I share great concern as far as the security of our information and to making sure our systems are up to date, secure, and protected from intrusion. And when we talk about cybercrime, we've used the general term quite a bit, but as you know, cybercrime changes on a regular basis. And when you look at all the different methods that criminals are using today, I'm going to give you just a quick peek at some of the terms that you're probably familiar with some, others might be new to you, but when we talk cybercrime, we're talking anything from malware, spyware, worms, extortion, denial of service, counterfeiting, computer viruses, email extortion, cyber stalking, theft of intellectual property, reshipping, identity theft, phishing, farming, spheering, whaling that have nothing to do with agriculture or fish, network intrusions, cyber terrorism, and Trojans, just to name a few. And it's interesting when you look at cybersecurity, how many different ways the criminals are trying to attack us. And when I say us, I'm referring to the state, but you can apply that to any business, any person. You can apply that to your personal lives as far as your own data security and how you are secured. And you look at the threat, as discussed earlier, it could be a kid in the basement or it could be folks overseas. And we see it all. And that creates part of the challenge. And when you look at what they're after, they're looking at data theft, fraud, espionage, to sell personal information, to sell credit card information, to sell medical information, to steal corporate data, sabotage, damage to a network, damage to websites, defacing websites, all for different purposes. Some might be political, some are just pure money of what they're after. And you look at, as far as the state goes, what are our primary threats? Well, our threats come in a number of forms, and one of our big threats is actually insider threats. When you look at the state of California with several 100,000 employees that access computers, some do inadvertent things that expose us, and others do intentional damage because of issues they may have with their state or with their employer. We have cyber spies, we have cyber criminals, we have hacktivists, and the CHP is responsible for investigating security-related incidents when state resources are involved. And we have a team called the Computer Crimes Investigations Unit, and of course we got to have an acronym for that, so we call them CCIU. That serve as responders to the attack. And I've got a great team that work for me that do a fantastic job. But the challenge is when they get involved, it's usually too late because there's been an incident that has occurred. And we've talked a little bit about it, but I want to just emphasize the importance of defense. Because if we can stop things before it happens, my team doesn't have to get involved and track down what happened, why did it happen, and what was exposed, and go for criminal prosecution when appropriate. And in order to do that, we work very closely with all our state partners. And we have a very, very close relationship with the Department of Technology and the Information Security Office. Because when you're looking at cybercrime, speed is of critical importance. Because when exposure happens, you want to minimize that exposure, you want to seize the evidence that you have, and you need to resume operations. And if you do the comparison to a traffic collision, which everybody knows the CHP is very involved in, typically a traffic collision occurs, we get notified quite quickly, we restore traffic, restore the roadways, do our investigation, and move on. In cybercrime, one of the challenges is you don't always know right away it happened. And sometimes some time goes by. But when you do find the breach, you have a couple things you need to do. Just like a traffic collision, you want to restore the information highway, so to speak, and get things moving, get that State Department or resources up and running, available to the public, available to the state employees in order to do that. But at the same time, we want to seize that evidence we need in order to do criminal prosecution where a crime is involved. And so it's one of those challenges where speed is really important, and the way you have speed is you have good information sharing. And you have that through our process with the Information Security Office. We also assist in administrative investigations as far as with different state departments. And so we have the criminal side, but we also have state employees, unfortunately, that sometimes misuse information. Sometimes it's administrative action. We help secure the evidence for that, and sometimes it's criminal action, in which case we help to prosecute that. Members of my team are highly trained in digital forensics and receive training from Secret Service. They also work on an FBI task force and are cross-deputized. So we actually have access to federal resources of the FBI as far as information, training, and cooperation with them, and we work very closely with them. We also partner with the Department of Justice. We actually just opened with the Department of Justice a new digital forensics lab. We partner with them. We work closely with their e-crimes personnel, and we're very excited about that partnership because it's pulling multiple resources from multiple agencies together to be more effective in our digital forensics abilities. And when you look at our current cases, they vary as far as how serious they are and what the different issues we look at. And I'll just give you a few examples. We have network intrusion investigations. We have someone from the outside trying to get into a network. We assist with forensic examinations for many different crimes, anything from homicide to fraud. We look at data destruction. We look at data recovery assistance. We work with the FBI task force. Sometimes we even assist with child pornography cases because they're all digital related with it. And when you look at vulnerabilities, there was some discussion earlier about vulnerabilities. It's interesting when you look at vulnerabilities and the challenges because vulnerabilities aren't a static thing. And so when you think of your house at home, you look at your front door, you make sure the lock works, and you're pretty secure in feeling that you're secure. The challenge with cybercrime is those vulnerabilities are changing on a regular basis. And so let me give you an analogy. Think about your iPhone or computer software. How often do you get updates as far as that software goes? Much of that software addresses vulnerabilities. Some is fixing bugs, some is giving you new features of that software, but a lot of it goes to fixing vulnerabilities that you're exposed based on that software vulnerability. And so when you look at the responsibility as a State Department and really trying to address vulnerabilities, they change on a regular basis. And I know we all watch the news and we see on the news a regular basis, hey, a new vulnerability in Internet Explorer was just exposed. Well, there's a process that has to go through in order to patch those vulnerabilities. And when you look at state systems, we need to make sure that patching that vulnerability doesn't crash a system. And so there's a lot of testing that needs to go in, but we need to make sure those patches actually need to get in. And those where the security assessments and those reviews are very, very important because those are known vulnerabilities that we just need to make sure we do a good job keeping that door locked. And I think the other thing that really is important is, with our defense, making sure our doors are locked, but also making sure we have good communication. And I appreciate our partnership with the Information Security Office because it really comes into play to make sure that our vulnerabilities are addressed. And I'll give you a simple example of how that process works. I'm sure you all get spam email at home that floods, or maybe even your regular accounts here, that floods you with exposure to malware. When you think about the state with the hundreds of thousands of email accounts there are, a bad actor can flood us with email. But if I find out from another state agency that they've identified an email that has malware in it, I, as a CIO, can block that from all my email accounts. And so what we do is we work together to pull that temptation to click on that attachment and infect our computer systems. And when we identify those things early, and different departments all share with the Information Security Office, that then pushes it out to everybody so we can filter our emails, suddenly my exposure has dropped dramatically because we've taken an exposure that would go to many people and we're able to filter it and block it because we know what that threat is. That's also the value of our fusion centers, of identifying what threats are and potential threats so that we can be prepared for them and so that we can respond in an appropriate way. And so that making sure our doors are locked, making sure we're sharing information, and then also making sure that we respond quickly to minimize any damage when a security breach happens are all critical components to make sure that we're successful in safeguarding state assets. And as Michelle Robinson said earlier, it's truly a team sport. It's not one department, it's all the departments working well together to ensure that we're sharing the information, and then also ensuring all my counterparts as chief information officers, we're implementing those policies and implementing those patches and implementing those processes necessary to make sure that we have well-secured information technology assets. Cybercrime is a significant threat to us all, And I think defense is one of those huge keys that we can't spend enough time really looking at and making sure that we're spending our resources there so that we prevent intrusions from occurring. And as a statewide law enforcement agency, the CHP is providing that investigative and operational support throughout the state to combat cybercrime. And we're committed to ensure cybersecurity and the detection, prevention, response, investigation, and reporting all work well, and we work well with our partners with that. And we'll continue to work with our partners, and we'll continue to look at the changing threats that we have out there and make sure we have good communication so that we can address and be ready for those threats as they come. Thank you.